Well, welcome back to the Encounter Faith podcast. My name is Ross, and if you are among what I can only assume are the tens of thousands of listeners who listen to this podcast the day it comes out, I want to say that it is Ash Wednesday. So really appreciate you guys being here, but also appreciate Pastor Tara Beth being here. We are getting a chance to mark Ash Wednesday together. So hello, Pastor Tara Beth.
Indeed. Love your show, Ross.
Wow.
So glad to be here.
Nice.
I've always wanted to say that to someone.
That feels good.
We'll see if it makes it to the cutting room floor or not.
Yeah. No, none of this is going in. We're not actually even recording. So
perfect.
I do want to talk about Ash Wednesday. You know, odds are that the vast majority of you who are listening, Ash Wednesday has since passed. However, one of the things that keeps coming up for me with this Lent this year is there's a feeling the need to kind of reset some expectations. I think if you came from a tradition that I came to, know who Jesus was very non-denominational context, I had no sense of church calendar. So Lent was always this thing where I was like, oh, right, other people are doing that. But for the vast majority of you listening and for the vast majority of people in the church, Lent has been this thing that you've kind of done for years. You've maybe given something up, but it becomes probably pretty easy to lose the significance of this season. So to ask a very broad question, why does Ash Wednesday matter? And why does the practice of Lent matter? The practices that come with Lent matter, I should say, in 2025.
Yeah, so I have come to really, truly appreciate the church calendar in the last decade as a pastor. And I say that because for me growing up as a creaster, a family that we attended church on Christmas and Easter, all of the practices felt a little rote and just something you do. And then later when I really became a follower of Jesus and affirmed my baptism, I joined a tradition that did not follow the church calendar at all. And so Easter Sunday would be like, surprise, it's Easter.
Right.
And really would kind of just catch you off guard. And same with Christmas Eve. Surprise, it's Christmas Eve. Oh my goodness. And one of the things I love about the church calendar is it guides you through a season of readiness and preparation. So in the same way that Advent calls the Christian to ready themselves for the coming Lord, Lent calls the Christian to ready themselves to journey to the cross. And Ash Wednesday is based on Jewish traditions of kind of heaping ash upon our head as before God, because we are so what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say so ashamed, but just so aware of our brokenness before a very holy God.
Sure.
So much so that we aren't even as we are good enough to be in the presence of God, and so we would heap ash on our heads or heap coals upon our head. And Ash Wednesday later became part of the Christian tradition to mark the 40-day or 6-week journey to the cross and then to the empty tomb. And so it marks the very, very beginning of Lent, where Christians come together and typically will be led through a very somewhat somber and reflective worship service where the Christians of the Christian community reflects on their own sin and their own brokenness and then their own mortality before God.
Sure.
And the pastor will place the ash on the Christian's head, and they will say, remember, you have come from dust, and to dust you shall return.
Right.
And remembering our mortality before God is an incredibly somber human experience, and it reminds us that we are not God. And then from there, the Christian would enter into the season of denying themselves as a season of preparation. So, of course, growing up, I thought all the Catholics were weird because they didn't eat meat and they didn't eat chocolate. I now have more appreciation for what they were doing because they really were giving something up.
For sure.
And there is something about, and in fact, I was just having a conversation with my son about this, talking about what we were going to give up. And there is something about denying yourself of something and replacing that, like what you would normally do for a time to commune with God, so that when Good Friday and Easter comes, you're not, oh, it's Good Friday, oh, it's Easter. But we have been anticipating.
Mm-hmm.
We have been journeying to that by the time we get to the cross and then the empty tomb, there is such a reverence and gravitas to that moment that we are ready to worship.
Yeah, that's good. You said this a couple different times. I think most vividly you talk about it reminds us that we're not God.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always hesitant to talk about something related to church as sort of a church versus culture mentality, because that's a pretty incomplete picture. However, I think one of the ways in which the church is probably most guilty at responding to culture rather than trying to lead it, just to set it up as a binary framework for sake of conversation, is we are responding to a culture where folks are, in not so many words, but are told they can be like God.
Mm-hmm.
Things have never been easier.
Mm-hmm.
Things have never been more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you, dear listener, want in your life, there is someone who is willing to provide it for you, usually to your doorstep, with the same device that you were using to listen to Pastor Tara Beth and I talk. How do you help, or maybe even a better question is, how do you hope folks use this intentional season that the church has of preparation to try to break some of those rhythms that they've been getting from all these other places?
Yeah, I love that question. And it's so true, because we are shaped in a society. Well, first let me say, of course, like if we talk to your average person on the street, we'd say, do you think you're God? And they'd all say, no, we're not God.
Right.
Like, are you crazy? No one would confess that. But our actions often say otherwise, that we think we are, and we try to play God. And we also do not, no one likes to think about their mortality. Who likes to think about that? Especially in like this positive thinking world, like don't think about your mortality. Just, YOLO, you only live once. And so you do you. And, but
somewhere your Gen Z friends are laughing at you that YOLO was your first reference for that moment, but
you know
yes.
Yeah. That was when millennials were like dominating.
When we ran the world.
Scene.
Exactly.
We ran the world. We were dominating all and our parents would be like, YOLO, what's that? But here we are. Okay, so nobody likes to sit there and think about their own mortality. But at the same time, it is appropriate to do so that we understand who we are in light of God.
Yeah.
Who we are before God. Who we are in the presence of God. Because we live in a world that says you don't have to age. Let's give everything we can to you. And listen, like I love me some serums and hair dye. And so I'm like steeped in this culture as well. But we so much of culture says like we can control everything. I mean, we wear these devices either around our fingers or around our wrists that tell us everything about our health and how much we sleep, and we're allowing these devices to tell us whether or not it's going to be a good day. And then we're trying to control our environment so we can correct maybe why our score is not so great, and our sleep score wasn't so great, so we're gonna control it even more,
Mm-hmm.
And we don't like to think about our mortality. I remember watching my dad even die, and it was horrific. It was horrific. It's the stuff that still just kind of keeps me up at night when I think about it.
Sure.
And even my dad in those final days would say, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I'm still going to beat this. I'm still going to fight this. Because we don't like to face our own mortality. And yet that is what we are invited into on Ash Wednesday.
One of the things that I'm always sensitive to in the conversations that we get to have, especially whenever you're on the podcast, is there's so much wisdom in what you're describing. Because I also think in the same way, if we stopped someone on the street and they said, well, no, I'm not acting like God, and they wouldn't understand the implication of a little g God or anything, any church phrase like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I also think when we talk about folks not wanting to embrace their mortality, it is because of all the messages you were just laying out.
Yeah.
But I think biblically we are given a different narrative.
Yeah.
And that's why a practice like Ash Wednesday is about embracing our mortality. Like you said, it's also about embracing, how we started this conversation, our standing in the presence of a holy God.
Yeah.
There are so many people who inhabit church buildings on a Sunday morning who have, for one reason or another, lost sight of the value of that.
Mm-hmm.
So from a position of just trying to help folks understand, I'm curious what value you feel in it and how you articulate that, because I intellectually know that this matters, but I think, like you're articulating, there's a hard time connecting the head and the heart.
Yeah. Yeah. So why would we think about our mortality? Why would we want to be reminded of our weakness? Why would we intentionally step into a zone or a place of saying, wow, I've come from the dust of the earth and I'm going to respond to the dust of the earth? And the reason why we do that is because we are but frail creatures. We are frail and decaying creatures that desperately need the power of the resurrection and the power of the cross to bring us from this life to the next.
That's good.
Not only that, but we are such frail creatures that we need the grace of God to meet us in our weakness, to meet us in our frailty, to meet us in our brokenness, and for that grace of God to meet us there and to pull us into the places of wholeness, to pull us into the places of freedom and flourishing. And so if we did not want to accept that we were mortal, that we are broken, that we are decaying and frail beings, well then why would we need the power of the resurrection? Why would we ever need the cross? Why would we need the grace of God?
That's a really good way of looking at it. This is a little bit of an Easter egg for those of you who listen to this podcast, because Pastor Tara Beth and I are talking after a conversation that I already had that you all will hear in a couple of weeks, that I talked to Elizabeth on our staff. And she kept connecting this idea of Lent, Ash Wednesday, to grace. Mm-hmm. And a little Easter egg for all of you, dozens of loyal listeners. But one of the things that I'm curious about is when folks who are not a part of the family, we talk about folks in the family kind of remembering why we do this, but folks who are not following the faith. We have this, so many folks are walking around with this expectation of like, oh yeah, I'll get to church by Easter. And we talked about this around Christmas, where it was sort of like, if you are a creaster, like my family was, you said like your family was, the story you are told is there's a baby, and then a few months later we killed the baby. Mm-hmm. And that is a weird, to put it mildly, way to interact with the faith. Mm-hmm. The story that grace tells, and the story that grace is able to help us better understand within the context of Lent, if we are willing to go there, is something far more deep, something far more meaningful, and ultimately something, to state the obvious, far more true. Mm-hmm. What I imagine, you have this moment where someone asks you what you do for a living, and you have that kind of like, how much church trauma are we about to unpack? Yeah. How do you balance some of the messaging that you're talking about, some of the rich biblical truth and need that this world has, with folks who aren't a part of the church? Because I would imagine that there's a lot of people listening who want to bring people into this, but maybe don't know how. Yeah. And the message of come think about your mortality isn't going to do it for them.
Right. So in light of recognizing a mortality is a grand collision of our mortality and the kindness of God.
Sure.
And the kindness of God reaching through the powers of death the kindness of God reaching through our brokenness, the kindness of God seeing us as we are and loving us as we are. You know, last year I told this story, and I think it begs telling this story now. There was a time when my boys were little, and Noah, I was sitting out in the back patio, and Noah started to play in the mud. And he got really muddy. I mean, I have a picture. His face is full of mud. His body is full of mud. And he ran up to me with his arms stretched out in the air as if, Mommy, hold me.
Sure.
Of course I had to. And I lifted him up and he said, give me a kiss, Mommy. And I thought, I am going to have mud all over my lips, but I don't care because I love this child.
Sure.
And the story of Lent is the kiss of God. It's the kindness of God that sees us frail, that sees us broken, wandering, at times despondent, at times out of sorts completely. And we as humans at times struggle to even love our own selves, let alone accepting that God loves us. And yet that's exactly what we discover in the Lenten journey is the kiss of God that loves us as we are and the kindness.
I like that a lot. Where I want to begin to land the plane here for those of us who go to Good Shepherd is throughout Lent, our series is based around this book, The Wood Between the Worlds. And I'm curious if you can help folks understand what this book is, and also essentially just what they can expect for Good Shepherd specifically as we journey through this season of Lent.
Yeah. So one of the themes that we often talk about at Good Shepherd is this idea of the already but not yet, right? And the already, of course, is the already of what Christ has done, the faithfulness of God who journeyed to the cross. The not yet is the promise of Revelation 21 that there will be a world of no more sorrow, that there will be a world of no more pain. And so what the Wood Between the Worlds does is it looks at a theology of the cross, and how does the theology of the cross shape that world of the sin and brokenness that is just yearning and crying out. You know, in Romans chapter 8, it paints this picture of all of creation groaning like pains of childbirth. That's as we watch wars wage around the world, as we watch leaders lead with incredible corruption of power, as we watch humanity turn against brother and sister. Creation is groaning for that to end. Creation is yearning for there to be a world of no more hunger or sorrow or pain, yearning for that Revelation 21. And so the Wood Between the Worlds is this theology of the cross. What is the cross? How does the cross inform us in this not yet space that we are living in? And how does it shape everyday, even ordinary Christians?
That's good. What I'm hopeful for folks when they hear about this, you've spoke about this recently. There's this sense that I think a lot of people carry right now of sort of a wrongness, right? Things just feel wrong. Mm-hmm. And historians would tell us that things are actually pretty good, but that the volume of how we are aware of all of the different areas in which the world is broken has given so many of us, not exclusive, not universally, but so many of us this impression of groaning, dare I say. Mm-hmm. To lean into that rather than to seek escapism or to lean away from it is actually one of the most subversive things we can do. To put all of that into the form of a question, you know, you and I are talking right before this Lent journey officially kicks off. Regardless of when people listen to this, regardless of if folks have a 40-day Lent experience or a 12-day Lent experience because they just remembered that Easter was coming up soon.
Yeah.
What do you hope folks get through this preparation that is going to be, I'm going to use the phrase most helpful. It's not quite what I'm going for, but most fruitful for them in this Lenten season? What do you hope how do you hope people look differently 40 days from now?
Yeah. I hope that people have a sense of grounding in their belovedness before God. And what I mean by that is that in coming to terms with who they are before God, that they would just be in total and complete awe of the journey of Jesus, of the faithfulness of what he has done. So much so that our lives bear witness to the credibility of that. Meaning, as we journey with Jesus to the cross and as we go into the season of preparation, that we would be so convicted, so shook by what God has done in Christ, that we would make new decisions on how we are living our lives and how we want to be reoriented, because that vision of the crucified Lord, of the crucified Lamb, has shook us to that degree.
So that is 100% the end of this episode. However, I want to leave a little Easter egg for people if you're willing to go down this route with me. So Pastor Tara Beth, this episode's coming out on Ash Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that you would delight those of us who are still listening to us
mm-hmm.
with recounting one of your most famous Ash Wednesdays here at Good Shepherd. A story that many people know, but I think it's a story that is worth retelling.
It is so worth retelling. Yeah. So I was probably 24, 25 years old. Pastors Greg and Gary said, "Hey, we'd love for you to preach Ash Wednesday." And back then the Ash Wednesday services used to be just packed. I mean, overflow. And I was so nervous. I thought, why would they ask a 20-something to do this? And so the order of the flow for that day was I was supposed to stand up and do the imposition of ashes. And then after doing the imposition of ashes, I was to walk straight to the platform and do the sermon. When I stood up, the microphone pack actually fell down. I was wearing a pencil skirt and it fell down through the skirt. And so there was no easy way to get it and pull it back up. And so I wanted to be discreet. So I very awkwardly walked across the platform with it dragging behind me.
Sure. I just want to highlight for people to build some dramatic tension. The goal here was to be discreet.
Discreet. Yes, exactly. And so it's kind of challenging to pull up a mic pack So
who among us hasn't had to pull up a mic pack through a pencil skirt? I mean, that's
right,
definitely,
exactly.
It's just hashtag relatable all over up in here.
Right, exactly. So I did the imposition of ashes and I decided I was going to go behind the organ to fix the mic pack. And I was holding a glass bowl of the ashes, and right below me was an air conditioning vent that blows like an F5 tornado, and it was gusting. And I am pulling up the mic pack, and the glass bowl of black ash fell on the air conditioning vent, made a crashing sound, and a black plume of ash flew up in the air and all over my face.
Sure.
And I had about 30 seconds to try to figure out how to get the ash off of my face. I still can't believe this happened. Every bit of this is real.
Yeah.
There's no preacher exaggeration here, folks. All of this is real.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had about 30 seconds to get the ash off my face and go onto the platform and preach. And I just remember turning around and seeing Pastor Greg, Pastor Gary, Pastor Glenn bent over laughing. My husband recounts he was in the back in overflow, and he's like, "Yeah, we didn't know what happened. We just heard a glass fall and plume of ash go up in the air, and it was chaos.
Mm-hmm.
It was chaos." And I think I kind of blacked out for the sermon.
Pun not intended.
I know I preached a sermon, but I blacked out through all of it. It was just words were coming out of my mouth, and the rest of me was numb. So this is forever lore at Good Shepherd.
For sure. I love that story. Genuinely, to end on maybe a more genuine note, which is what folks who listen to this podcast are more familiar with, I love that the 3G pastors were all laughing. Oh yeah,
and that's our culture, right? That's even on our staff today. That culture has been passed down. It's can't take and that's talk about Ash Wednesday. We can't take ourselves that seriously.
Yeah. Because there's someone who is there who is a creaster or is there out of some sense of tradition or habit, but doesn't necessarily have the connection to it.
Yep.
That person just sees all of a sudden a explosion of ash in the back of the room that they're not used to, which is hilarious on by itself. But then they see the three pastors bent over laughing, and it gives them permission to go, even in this moment where I am embracing my mortality, like we were talking about, I don't have to take myself too seriously, which I think is so much of the lived experience of the church that we don't bring into a worship service.
That's right.
So I just love hearing that story. But my favorite part of it is actually a reflection on who we want to be as a church and who I believe, at least, we were meant to be as believers.
Amen. Amen. I believe that too.
Thank you for listening to the Encounter Faith podcast. This podcast is a service of G. Shep Productions from Good Shepherd Lutheran Church in Naperville, Illinois. All rights reserved. If you're in the area, we'd love to meet you on a Sunday morning at our 9 a.m. or 10:45 services. At Good Shepherd, we are inviting everyone to walk together in the calling of Christ for a life of eternal impact. This podcast is produced and hosted by me, Ross Cochran. And our theme song is Wake the Earth by 1111 Worship. Thank you for listening. We'll talk again soon.